Good morning. I am Sarah with the State Library, and today we have the first of a three-part series on legal reference training. And you see on your screen it says Legal Research for Public Librarians. I know we have some non-public librarians out there, but we're going to be talking about legal reference for the non-law librarian. And giving all three of our presentations this week is Deborah Person, Associate Law Librarian at the University of Wyoming. And I'm going to hand it off to her in just a second here. Both Deb and I will be monitoring questions throughout the program. And so I'd like you to look at your screen. And if you do not see a chat box on the right side of your screen, you should see three little icons. The first of which is a red rectangle with an arrow. You can click that and pop it out, and you'll have the opportunity to type in a question. And Deb will be taking those throughout the course of the program, and I'll be kind of keeping a second eye on those in case she misses any. And in the off chance that we both miss them, we certainly will get to them at the end of the program. With that, I will go ahead and hand it off to Deb. Today's first session is on introductory legal reference.
Well, let's go ahead, and I thank you very much for your introduction. And I think I've got my slides going here, and I want to welcome everybody to this series and assure you that my goal is to begin addressing some very basic legal information, and I am hoping that it's going to provide a framework for the next 2 days as we talk about case law, courts, and statutes. But I'm hoping that it's going to help you through those sessions, and if you are unable to attend any of those sessions, of course, the State Library, who's kind enough to host our sessions here, will be posting these on their web archives. So this is a really great opportunity for all of us. I'm going to actually begin with a civics lesson, and I'm kind of sorry to begin at such a kind of a basic review, but I want to talk about the United States Constitution. Of course, the Constitution set up the federal government, and the first three articles have basically defined the branches of the government. We have Article 1 that sets up the legislative branch and it gives it the power to create law. Article 2, which set up the executive branch, gives it the power to enforce law. And Article 3, which set up the judicial branch, which is the courts, who have the power to interpret the law. One thing we should be aware of is that the Constitution actually defines the powers of the federal government, and to some degree it limits the powers of the federal government. That is, it states where the government has powers, and these would be in areas like collecting taxes, coining money, developing procedures for bankruptcies, regulating commerce, raising an army and a navy, and then it leaves the rest of the powers to the states. And the states, in turn, have also developed their own constitutions, and in their constitutions, they tend to parallel the federal constitution. They're certainly not identical, but in the state constitutions, they set up their governments as well, and as far as I know, all of them have three branches of government, just like our federal government does, though they're not all exactly the same as the format that the federal government uses. So I want to jump into the sources of law. I'm going to talk about the branches of government and the law that they create. But before I even go into that, I do want to remind everybody that what we're looking at now is a federal government with three branches of government, and in addition to that, 50 state governments, each with three branches of government, and you have the territories with their three branches of government, and you can see how we have just exploded the possible resources that are available to us for legal research. That's why we're going to approach these in sort of an encapsulated fashion so that they're easier for us to handle. So looking at the law that's created by each of these branches, we'll talk about the legislative branch first. And of course, they create law in the form of statutes, and those tend to be what we think of when we think of law that we're going to research. The statutes are the bills passed by the legislature and signed by the governor or the president. I'm throwing constitutions in there. The legislative branch doesn't necessarily draft the Constitution. Though it does adopt the constitutions are available in the sets of statutes that you're researching, and the legislative branch does have sometimes a role in amending the Constitution. So I'm putting it there because I want to make sure I don't leave the Constitution out anywhere. The judicial branch makes law in the form of opinions, also known as decisions in cases. And you might be noting to yourself that, hey, on the previous screen, I just showed you that the courts interpret the law. I didn't say that the courts make law. And that is true. In most cases, courts are interpreting the statutes for how they apply to the individual facts of the cases that come before them. However, and this is kind of important to remember from a research perspective, there are common law areas of law. We actually adopted this common law system from the British system that's centuries old. And it actually means that for centuries we have relied on the courts to determine the law in certain areas where statutes don't exist. And those areas would be, for example, contracts, torts, which are personal injury issues, and property. There are a few others. Common law is found in the state court opinions. You're not going to find them in the statutes in most cases, and so it means you have a whole other place to look for law on these particular areas. Let me also sneak in a little mention here about generalizing. I can't give an introduction to anything without talking in generality, so there's always going to be specifics that might possibly be different from what I'm actually saying to you. But I want you to keep in mind, generally speaking, this is how the system works. Then we have the executive branch, which is, of course, our governor or our president. And the executive branch makes law in the forms of regulations and executive orders. The executive branch also includes our administrative agencies. And really, in my opinion, this is actually the most interactive level of government, but I don't think it's the perception of the general public. But if you think about the agencies that you're dealing with, the Department of Motor Vehicles, the Game and Fish Commission, the Internal Revenue Service, the Social Security Administration, these are people that really touch our lives on a very basic level, and there are laws and regulations that come out of those agencies. So it's a very important group to not forget. And up to this point, I've been really focusing on our federal government and our state government, but I want to step back for a minute because I don't want to appear too myopic, and I want to talk about other jurisdictions. When we talk about jurisdictions, we're talking basically about whose law applies, who has the power to govern a particular situation. So I want to start really broad and talk about international law. When I'm talking about international law, I'm talking about law between nations or international organizations. So we're talking about law at the international level, which is going to be treaties. And remember, Native American interactions can fall into this category. Native American interactions with the United States government, the United Nations mandates, the Geneva Convention, United Nations Human Rights Council, European Union, Organization of American States. All of those are conventions and treaties that various countries sign, and they're dealing with each other internationally at that level. Okay, that is separate and distinct from foreign law. Foreign law is talking specifically about the law that applies to the individual nations, the law that they have for their own citizens. And then, of course, we've already talked about federal law. When I talk about federal law, I'm talking about United States law. And we want to note that federal law does not trump state law. As we said already, the United States Constitution gives specific limited powers to the federal government, and the rest of the powers they left to the states. So many of the issues that we see in the legal arena are actually issues of state law. There are some restrictions, like state laws can't contradict federal laws of the United States Constitution, but we do have a lot of power within the state to make our own laws as we see fit. I do want to touch for just a minute, because I'm going to actually take something that looks like it's black and white and make it gray, because there are certainly instances where the federal government has made law in the form of statutes or case decisions that appear on the face to be very local. For instance, the Gun-Free School Zones Act, which says you can't carry a gun within, I forgot the distance, 100 or 200 yards of a school zone, or the Civil Rights Act, which tells a local restaurateur who they have to serve, whom they must serve in their own store. Those things on face would seem to be extremely local and not something that the federal government would be able to regulate in any way. However, those things, most of those statutes or cases that come up have been challenged in the court, and the courts have found them constitutional based on either the Bill of Rights, which are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution and that provide the framework for our individual rights as American citizens, or other aspects of the Constitution, the powers that are provided to the federal government. For instance, the power to regulate commerce, and that is actually used a lot for the federal government to make more localized regulations and statutes. I'm not making this into a political statement in any way. I just want to point out that things that might seem to be clear to us to be one jurisdiction can end up popping into another jurisdiction without our necessarily recognizing it. So it's good to just be aware that that can happen. And then I didn't want to leave out municipalities, because city governments certainly have a role, and sometimes those are the people that walk in the door and want assistance, are the people who are dealing with the very local governments. So I want to talk about what all the things that we've discussed to this point are primary law. I hope you're seeing the steps that I'm taking, though if you didn't see my slides, you probably are missing it to some degree. But we talked about the United States government, or the United States Constitution and the state constitutions, setting up branches of government. They set up 3 branches of government. And then we talked about the 3 branches of government and the laws that they make. Now we're going to talk about the laws that they make and where we can find them, because this is really what matters to us as researchers. So the laws that come out of the legislative branch, of the statutes and the Constitution, those are laws that we find within collections of state or federal statutes or codes. Laws that come from the judicial branch, which are our court decisions, are laws that we find in paper out of a collection of reporters. And laws that come out of the executive branch, the regulations of the agencies and executive orders, are what we find in administrative codes.
There we go. Okay.
Back to jurisdiction.
Yes, yeah. Okay, we're
Okay,
good.
now to primary law again.
Yes.
Okay, I'm really sorry. It's following as far as I can see.
No worries there. Well, it's a live show. We'll keep it going.
Okay, so, all right, I'll recap very briefly. Statutes and constitutions are what we find in the state and federal statutes or codes. Court decisions from the judicial branch are found in reporters. Regulations and executive orders from the executive branch are found in administrative codes collections. And then from the municipal law perspective, we have law in the form of city charters, which is basically our constitution at the city level, and then municipal code or city ordinances. You'll see them called both of those. Okay. I'm switching screens. Did you switch with me?
Yes, now we're good.
Okay, secondary sources. Because up till now we've been talking about primary sources, that is, those that actually contain the law themselves. And I did want to talk about secondary sources because these can be really important to you for directing patrons. I'm starting with treatises. That's what we call books in our discipline. Basically because a treatise is expected to be an in-depth work on a specific area of a legal topic, and so it's expected to be, big and heavy and voluminous, and that's why they call it treatises. However, we call any book on a legal issue a treatise, even, small nutshells and those kinds of things. So I put those first because I'm assuming that you have some type of books in your collection for a small, legal collection, probably at least no-low press books, the how to draft your own will, or how to set up an estate or something like that. So I figure those are things that you probably see often enough. Law reviews are just our term for the journal literature, and many of you have access to the Hein Online product, which is a really excellent archive of legal articles. Formerly it wasn't very easily searchable, but now it's got a very nice search feature, and it's a really good tool for looking for journal literature on legal topics. And this is actually a place that I start a lot of people who don't have any background in legal resources. A lot of times they'll set them down and we'll do a search in the journal literature, because it gives them a background of information, and it also gives them sites to primary sources that they're going to need. I'm imagining that not many of you have legal encyclopedias, the main collections of which are Corpus Juris Secundum, or CJS, and Amjur, American Jurisprudence, which is now in its second series. I included them here along with the next two, American Law Reports and Restatements of the Law, because not that I think you would have them in your collection, but if somebody brings you a list of citations and you see these on the list, kind of like you to recognize at least that they're secondary sources, and that you can direct them to a law library to access some of these materials. Legal encyclopedias, just like specific encyclopedias in other disciplines, are going to handle broad legal topics, and they handle them in a lot of detail. They list not only introductory information to those topics, but also a lot of case law and statutes that are going to be relevant to your further research. So they're a really nice starting tool. ALRs, American Law Reports, and restatements are specific to case law research, but they're really interesting tools, and I just want to talk about them briefly, because if you think that somebody who encounters a legal issue is going to benefit from them, you might, as I said, refer them to a law library. American Law Reports basically takes case law. They take a case on a particular topic. Of course, cases deal with a number of topics, but they'll take a specific topic from a case. An example would be Brown versus Board of Education and the topic of school integration. So they'll publish the case for you, which is very nice. But more than that, they publish an analysis of the case. So they talk about the aspects of the case and the holding of the case. But in addition to that, they review similar issues in all the various jurisdictions, federal and state, so that you can see how other states and the federal government have handled this issue of school integration. So it's a really good place to go for one-stop shopping, basically, or at least an initial place, to get sites to a lot of cases on a particular legal issue. They're also pretty current, so they'll handle some current legal topics that you won't see in some of the other literature. Restatements of the law are a whole nother being. I didn't have my screen up, so I'm hoping that in the audio you remember us talking about common law issues that the courts have addressed for a couple hundred years. Now, the issues of contracts, torts, personal property, real property, all those property issues. We have, in Wyoming alone, we have 125 years of case law on those topics. And if anybody wanted to go back and, we're going to write an argument on those topics, they'd have to sort through cases for 125 years and find out, say, what are the elements of a contract, what is an offer, what is an acceptance. Well, Restatements has already done that for us. They've gone through all the jurisdictions. They found the commonalities among all the jurisdictions. They have therefore defined then a black letter statement of this is what a contract is, these are the elements, this is an offer and an acceptance, so that you have one place to go and you don't have to sort through many years worth of court decisions in order to determine that. So those are good tools if you're looking for a way to handle some secondary resources. Moving on from them, though, as I talked about recognizing sites, I think this is a really important aspect, is being able to recognize sites to legal sources. And I have to tell you, when I very first started working in a law library, I picked up a document. It was one page, front and back. It took me 2 minutes to read it. And it basically told me how to find a resource using a legal citation. So I went out into the library stacks. I found a document that it was referencing, and I thought to myself, this is so easy. What else could I possibly have to know about legal research? Well, that was a terribly naive approach on my point. But just knowing how to read a site, I think, conquers a lot of the intimidation of legal resources. So I have a couple examples here. And legal resources citations tend to follow the same format. A legal citation begins with a volume number, and then next is abbreviation of the specific title that they're talking about. That's confusing, but I'll show you some resources to help you through those abbreviations. And they're followed by the page number. In a complete legal citation, you might have additionally a jurisdiction and a year, but depending on what people bring to you, sometimes they'll just bring you a portion of that information. So what I've got here is a sample of a case citation, 23 P. 2nd 241, which is actually referencing volume 23 of the Pacific Reporter 2nd Series, page 241. Now, similarly, a citation to a law review article is going to follow the same format. 10 YOL Rev 21 is referencing volume 10 of the Wyoming Law Review, page 21. And once you know that, you pretty much know how to cite any of your, or read any of your legal citations. But just because I want to make it clear, when I talk in generalities, the statutes and regulations are only slightly different. Instead of beginning with a volume number, they begin with a title number. And then there's abbreviation of the set of statutes or regulations that is being referred to. And then finally is the section number for the statute or the part for the regulation, as opposed to the page number that we found in the case citation and the law review article. So a statute citation that looks like 42 U.S.C. section 1983 is referencing Title 42 of the United States Code, section 1983. And a federal regulation from agency regulation citation that reads 18 CFR 111 is actually referencing Title 18 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 111. So they're pretty simple. I think you get the idea. Now, if we want to talk about help for the legal abbreviations, there are a couple of resources you can use. There is a book, Beaver's Dictionary of Legal Citations. We have some on reserve and some in the reference area. People usually don't think to look for them themselves, but they'll come and ask, and I go and retrieve them because I think they're a really good tool for people to know about. So I would recommend that if you wanted to add that to your collection. It's just a one-volume piece. There's another site, Cardiff, and you'll notice that that's in the, it's a British site, but I'm going to go there, and I'm hoping you'll follow me. Let me see. And at this website, we're now able to search by abbreviation. I can do it in the left column or the right column. And let's say I have an abbreviation for, P. 2nd, all right? Let's say I want to search P. 2nd because I don't remember what that stands for. And the searching it now comes up Pacific Reporter 2nd Series. And therefore, as a librarian, I can go and see who has this document for me to retrieve. I do want to talk about, in retrospect, I thought maybe I shouldn't do this, but actually it comes up today and in the next couple of sessions. So I do want to kind of address criminal law versus civil law. Criminal law is basically clearly defined in the statutes of any jurisdiction. The courts do interpret the laws as they apply to the facts in each case, but basically if you're looking for a law that deals with a criminal issue, you're going to find something like that in the statutes. The civil law is law between civilians, right? And this is going to encompass all non-criminal actions. You'll probably notice that these first three issues, property, contracts, and torts or personal injury, are the same three I've been talking about as common law issues that are defined by the courts for the last couple hundred of years. So those things you might not find in statutes, but you would find them in court decisions. And these are just a small sampling of the laws that could apply, but family law issues, wills and estates, businesses, those are civil issues, but those are things that tend to be statutory. So we can't say that all civil law is something you find in court decisions, but just want to try and make that distinction for you because it affects us a little bit later. Okay, I'm hoping that you are seeing a civil versus criminal page because I kind of wanted to give us an opportunity to review where we think some of these might fit. Not only whether it fits within civil or criminal, but also what jurisdiction laws are going to apply. So I'm just going to read out some of these legal issues and you think to yourself where you think they might apply. In some cases, there's not really a right or wrong to this because there can be a couple of different options. So if we're talking about tax evasion, I mean, it's good for us to think about what source we'd want to go to. And this is the start, to think about what jurisdiction applies here. So if we're thinking about an issue of tax evasion, where would we be likely to go for that? What resource do we think applies? I would call that a criminal issue, and we can say that is either state or federal law. Now, in Wyoming, if it's a Wyoming resident and they haven't worked anyplace else, that's obviously going to be an issue of federal law if they come in and say, I need to investigate, this tax evasion. But in other states that do have state income tax issues, then that could be something that falls to state law as well. Failure to pay child support, how is that followed up? Where do we go for those? That's actually a civil issue, although the way that states proceed with that, as stringently as they hunt out people who are not paying for child support, we may think of that as a criminal issue, but it's actually a civil issue. It certainly is controlled by state. It's going to be in the state resources, either the state statutes. If we need to get into litigation of that, which we'll talk about later, we're going to be using the rules of civil procedure, so it's good to be able to identify those. A simple name change, where is that going to be? A name change is going to be also a state issue, and that's clearly a question of civil procedure. Drug possession. I think this is a no-brainer, but you never know what kinds of things come up with that. And in fact, it's the whole reason I thought of doing this, because drug possession is clearly a criminal issue, right? However, there are state laws on drug possession, there are federal laws on drug possession, and in some instances, there are municipal laws on drug possessions. This is why it's really important to know the jurisdiction. If somebody comes in with an issue of criminal law, drug possession, traffic violation, whatever, you need to know where the citation or the warrant or whatever came from before you can answer their question. You need to know what jurisdiction. Did it come from a city police officer? Was it a state trooper? Was it a federal agent? Because you don't know whose law applies until you know where the citation came from. A landlord's failure to return a deposit to their tenants, right? This is a civil issue. It's dealing with state law. I like this one. I throw this in here because I don't know if you recognize it, but this is a property issue. Property is one of those areas of law that we said was controlled by the courts. It's a common law issue. For 120 years, the Wyoming Supreme Court has made our laws on property issues. However, this is a nice exception because somewhere around the year 2000, the state legislature passed a Residential Renters Act that some of you may be familiar with that actually changed the common law of 100 years of Wyoming property law and set some standards for the duties for the landlord and for the tenants. So things that we've identified as being common law issues and handled by the courts have now become statutory. And so I'm really sorry, because it seems like the focus of my discussion here is to make things gray that are black and white, but it just happens to be the nature of the beast. I also thought about taking out my last example here, expungement of the juvenile record, because actually I wavered on it, so whichever way you go, you can't be wrong. I called it a civil issue. It's certainly a state issue. Expungement, a juvenile record is, a criminal record from when a person has not yet reached adulthood. When they get to reach adulthood and they have not had any more issues, they can clean their record. And this is a part of, not of the criminal code of the state, it's a part of the juvenile code of the state, but the juvenile code also handles criminal issues. So, it could have really fallen anywhere, but actually cleaning up the record is not a criminal issue. It's actually a civil issue, and you would use civil means to do that. So these are just a few examples to give you something to think about as you prepare to try and determine jurisdictions for the issues that come in front of you. I do want to talk for a little bit about unauthorized practice of law. It's something, this is more of a library issue, and I think we really need to be aware of this particular element of legal reference. I'm sure we're all familiar with it, but there are a couple of things that I thought kind of indicated to us when we might be going too far. And one would be interpreting the legal resources for somebody. It's not at all uncommon when you put a difficult legal treatise in front of somebody or a set of statutes, it's all legalese, for them to come back to you and say, does this mean blah, blah, blah? And that's, actually it's an easy question to handle for those of us who aren't legally trained, because we say, well, it looks like it is to me. My general answer is, well, that's how I would interpret it, but if you have outstanding questions about that, you probably want to talk to a legal professional. And I leave it at that. I remember when I went to library school, in the regular reference classes, not legal reference classes, they would always tell us, give them 3 resources for any question that they have, because you want to make sure they have an unbiased presentation of their topic. Well, that's not always possible. I might be able to put 3 different copies of statutes in front of them, but all the statutes would say the same thing, and they're going to have to figure out how to interpret them. But you do want to be careful that you're not misleading somebody in interpreting the statutes for them. It's not, you don't want to get yourself and your library in trouble. But B, you probably are not helping the patron if you're not familiar with the legal topic at hand and exactly what's involved. We have to consider that while state attorney generals are probably not going to come back to any librarian and prosecute them for unauthorized practice of law, it's a possibility. There's also the possibility that a patron could come back and say, you told me to do this, the courts turned it away because it wasn't right, and now I'm past my time limit, and conceivably they could file a civil suit against you. It's highly unlikely, but I did want to make you aware of the possibility in case you weren't aware of it already. I also think that forms are always a danger. We can put forms in front of people. Forms might be the #1 thing that I have non-law and university people come in for, and it's really hard to find them the appropriate form. We want to be careful that we're not doing things like filling out the forms for them. And in some cases, I've heard of instances where we don't even want to identify the form for them, but that might be going a little bit too far. But I will tell you that a former county attorney here in Albany County would tell the county court staff that they were not allowed to tell patrons which form they needed to use. They knew which form they needed to use, and they had copies of the forms, but they weren't allowed to tell the patrons. So what they would tell the patrons is, go to the law library and tell them you need such and such a form. Well, I didn't have the same forms as the county had. I had generic form books, and when the people came over, I would get on the phone and call the county and say, exactly which form was it now you wanted me to, show them to, because I didn't have the same expertise as they had, but it was preserving the county from any possible lawsuits. And so forms are just traditionally a hard request to meet. And since I've talked to you about, being careful with forms, now I'm going to talk to you about places to find the forms. I will, though, add another proviso. I've had faculty who are absolutely appalled that I would take patrons to sample forms in these large collection of form books because they said that the forms are never going to be sufficient. There are too many nuances. They can't possibly use a standardized form for complicated legal issues. And that may very well be true. But the people who are coming in our door are not usually dealing with complicated legal issues. It's more a quitclaim deed or a durable power of attorney or something like that, that hopefully you can meet their needs with what you have at hand. So one of the places I would refer you to, is the Gale Legal Forms that you have available on your WILD page. You've probably been here a million times. I actually haven't used this set yet, but right here, your Gale Legal Forms. It has some Wyoming-specific forms, which I think probably come from some of the other places that I'm going to show you here. But this is one good site for you to access forms if you have a patron coming in the door. Another site that I would refer you to is the Wyoming Court Rules site. Now, we'll talk about court rules more in the next 2 days, but I did want you to know that there's a court rules volume that comes with your Wyoming Statutes Annotated set, and I'm pretty sure all of you have the Wyoming Statutes Annotated, and that is a great resource. We keep ours on reserve because it walks out the door, because it's a valuable tool. It tells people how to litigate. It's the procedures for litigating. So that's a tool that you want to keep your hands on, and that provides forms in that book. But it's also online at this web page, and you have, I'm just going to select one, Rules of Civil Procedure, and as I go to this website and then scroll down past all of the rules, I'm going to get to the bottom, the appendix, and that's going to provide me an appendix of forms. They're kind of cut and paste forms. They're not very neat, but they're a good option for people who are trying to do litigation and don't have any idea how to go about it. Well, they're actually written for professionals too. They apply to everybody who is litigating or proceeding with the court. I assume that you're all familiar with the divorce kits that are available on the Wyoming Supreme Court website. I'm not going to go there in the interest of time, but there are divorce kits for pro se divorces, pro se's, people who are proceeding without an attorney, pro se divorces for people who have no children and people who do have children, and they kind of walk you through the process as well. So those are valuable to have available to you. Of course, when we're looking for forms, we're usually looking for free forms. Find Law and Lexis One both have forms. They have forms for which they charge, and they have forms that are freely available. If you do a state search on them and they bring up something state specific, that is almost exclusively forms for which they charge, and I will bet you that they're getting those forms out of the court rules volumes, because Wyoming doesn't have a specific forms book, and they're not writing the forms for us, so they're getting them from somewhere. So there are other resources that you can go. But if you're looking for a generic form, like a power of attorney or something, then those are probably forms that they don't charge for and that you could download pretty easily from these sites. And there are a lot of other sites that provide free forms, and that actually is why I'd like to go to the Washlaw website. Washlaw doesn't have a form site per se. That is, they don't collect forms, but they've collected links across the internet for forms, and they'll tell you whether they're free or whether it's a paid service, and you can see that they have state-specific forms for different areas of the law as well. So I really like this site. Washlaw keeps their links current, and they link to the appropriate websites for state documents and other things. It's a site that we'll see again over the next couple of days. And then if you don't have in your collection, and if it's still available, and you have people who come in asking about setting up corporations in Wyoming, we have so few Wyoming-specific books that this Bagley treatise on Wyoming corporate law and practice, which has forms in it, for dealing with the Secretary of State's office and all. And by the way, the Secretary of State's office is another good site to go to for corporate information. This is a really good tool to have in your library. And if you don't have it, you'd like to take a look at the table of contents or something, then feel free to contact us and we can send you a table of contents and you can decide whether that's something you'd like to continue with. I have listed a couple of other sources that I thought might be helpful to you. This wild page is the page we're just at. I'm going to go back to it for a second because when I was there I was talking specifically about the forms, the Gale legal forms, but I also want to note that this is where, if your library has access to Hein Online, this is where you get into it. I'm sure you know this. Legal Track indexes legal information, but Hein Online actually has the full text of a variety of articles, a number of articles. It has a very deep collection. Sometimes we have people search in Legal Track to find what they want, and then we go in Hein Online. But now that Hein Online has improved their platform, it's really a good search tool. And like I said before, access to law review literature is a first start for me for a lot of people who haven't used legal resources before. You also have federal congressional information, American Memory, and as you scroll down the page, then there's also LexisNexis Congressional. This might be just university associated. I can get into it. I don't know whether you have access to it from your public libraries. But there's a lot of good information here, a great resource for people who are looking for legal assistance. There are legal dictionaries available online. If you don't have a Black's Law dictionary somewhere in your library, which I would also recommend, but your patrons might also appreciate links to the online law.com, but most of the legal portals, Cornell, Legal Information Institute, Find Law, Lexis One, those will all have access to reference materials on legal dictionaries as well. And those can be very helpful because it's dangerous to try and interpret legal terms using everyday language, because there are a lot of layman terms that don't mean the same thing in legalese as they do in our natural language. So I would, if I had any questions, look some of those terms up in the dictionary. Zimmerman's is kind of a brief sort of encyclopedia that provides some links to other resources on similar topics. It can be helpful if you were trying to get kind of a basic knowledge of a specific topic. And I'm just going to scroll down here to, let's see, agriculture is a nice example, but you'll see really how brief it is. It's nothing like a legal encyclopedia in paper. But it does provide some links that might be helpful and talks about decisions and other possible search terms that you might think about searching. And last of these other sources, I would consider going to the NOLA website. Of course, we're probably all familiar with NOLA Press because of their publication of legal resources for the non-legal researcher. I've had first-year law students who go out and work in the field in the summer, and they say, where can I don't understand any of this stuff I'm dealing with, and I don't understand any of the stuff I'm reading. Where can I get just a quick knowledge of this? And this is a place I actually send them. You know, it has some legal topics. Obviously, their intent is to sell their works, but they also have some good question and answers, some good articles, and then they have their advertisements for their own documents. So there's information on this website that if you have somebody who walks in the door, wants to do their own will, or wants to know something about immigration law or bankruptcy, this is a good starting place, because now they can get an understanding of the difference between Chapter 7 bankruptcy and Chapter 13 bankruptcy before they dig into the legal information that's out there and available to them, which can be very confusing and difficult to understand. I'm really sorry about the problems with the slides up early, but I wonder if anybody else has any questions.
We'll just give folks a minute to type a question in. Also, at this time, if you have a mic or are using audio via your phone and you want to ask a question to the whole group, there is also a little hand icon. It's a little hand with a green arrow, and you can raise your hand and we will unmute you, and you can share your question with the group. So we'll give folks just a moment to do that. And my apologies too, Deb, that I didn't catch that sooner, that you weren't moving along. Sometimes some presenters sit on the same slide for a while as they give their talk, so it took me a while to realize what was going on.
Thank you, both of you, for cueing me to that.
Yeah, no problem. So we'll just give folks a minute here to type in any questions, and if there aren't any, we'll go ahead and conclude, but we'll give folks just a moment. And then just a reminder, the other two presentations will be tomorrow and Thursday, also from 10 to 11. Tomorrow's program is on courts and case law, and Thursday's on statutes and regulations, and certainly all three of these will be archived on the State Library website. If you're not able to attend those live, or if you want to let your coworkers know about that. And I will just make another quick comment too. I do know, because the State Library does share our continuing education events with other library associations out there across the country. I know there might be some non-Wyoming folks tuning in, and I'm really excited about that. I know that Deb is covering some Wyoming-specific content, but certainly I hope you can use this and have it apply to your state, whether it's your state court's website or your state law library's website. Might have some of the same comparable information that Deb's covering here today. With that, I don't know, Deb, I don't see any other questions coming through, so I think we might go ahead and conclude for today.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to thank all of you for being here and taking part in the discussion, and thank you, Sarah, for monitoring with me and keeping me online there.
No problem. Great. Thank you so much, Deb, and thank you, everybody, and we'll go ahead and conclude for the day. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Sarah.